My name is Danielle Oswald, and I've been doing immigration law as a practitioner since 1992. Today we're going to talk about humanitarian-based immigration, and specifically about the U.S. asylum application process. So we're going to cover what the law is, what are the three forms of relief for asylum, because there are three types, the eligibility for asylum, what are the 5 protected grounds. We'll do 3 hypotheticals, and we'll also talk about types of asylum application, affirmative or defensive. And we'll talk about how do you get into removal proceedings, what documents do you need in removal proceedings. And I'm going to give you some really practical advice to win cases, because there's no point really pursuing an asylum if you don't give yourself the best chance to win by really documenting what your problems were and making the judge understand perhaps a very complex problem and making it simple. We're also going to talk about how to conduct a consultation. We're going to talk about how to spot issues. I've done this presentation before AILA, and it's been one that was very good for new practitioners, but this will also give you details if you are out in the public and you just want to know some very general basic ideas that can help you even when you're talking to your lawyer. So what happens if you're granted? What happens if you're denied? And these are the things we're going to cover. So asylum law is under Section 208 of the Act, and there's 2 different kinds of asylum. There's asylum, which gives you all the benefits. There's withholding of deportation, which gives you some of the benefits, but not all. And then there is withholding of removal under the Convention Against Torture. Well, that does not give you, again, all the benefits that asylum does. These 3 forms of relief are all use the same application. It's always the 589, which is the asylum application. And asylum, we have to remember, is discretionary. So that's a bit different than the other 2 types we're going to talk, because it means that the judge can look at other factors, negative factors that you may have had, such as if you had a criminal charge, if you had other negative factors. You can also look at positive factors. So what do you get with asylum? You get a work authority. That's great. You get a green card after 1 year, and very importantly, you can bring in your wife and your children or your husband as derivatives. And then they can apply for a green card a year later. So those are great benefits. Who is eligible for asylum? Sometimes I get emails from people who are abroad. Well, they're not eligible for asylum. They can ask for refugee status from there, but they have to be in the U.S. physically present in order to ask for asylum. So what are the exceptions? If you applied to another country and you had safe haven, and you were safe in a third country and you lived there for many years and you had legal status there. I just recently had a woman who had lived in Gambia for 20 years, had her children there, had lived there, and had fled from another country, African country. And the judge said he gave her withholding because he said she had lived in a third country and had safe haven and had been firmly resettled. 20 years is a very hard time period to overcome. So what do you have to file for asylum? You have to file it within 1 year. This has become a big issue now because lots of people coming across the border, and perhaps they're jailed for 2-3 months, and maybe they get out and they have to make their way back to try to find a family or a friend to house them. They don't know how to get the application out. Maybe they don't even have a court date yet, and they don't know how to file an asylum application if they're in deportation and they don't have a court date. So the immigration has come up with some processes that will help people, such as lodging, that will enable people to meet the 1 year filing deadline even if you don't have a court date. If you've been previously denied asylum, you can't then file asylum again unless you filed at the asylum office affirmatively, then you could refile. The 1 year rule does not apply to one group of people. Who is that group of people? Unaccompanied minors. 5 grounds of protection. The 5 grounds of protection are race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, political opinion. And you have to prove both subject and objective fear. And you can win on either past persecution or well-founded fear of future persecution. So when do these apply? So if you have past persecution, means in your home country, were you harmed physically or emotionally or in other ways? Well-founded fear of persecution happens such as perhaps a country like Ukraine or Syria, where you were here as a student and suddenly there was a civil war that broke out and you can't go back. So you didn't suffer harm specifically in your home country. So those are the differences. So here's a fact pattern of a case that was rather interesting and has many different issues. Sometimes more than one of the 5 grounds applies, such as in this case. It was a Ukrainian citizen who was also happened to be Jewish and had lived in eastern Ukraine and taught classes there and cooperated with Western countries. And then there was the crisis broke out of pro-Russian separatists and supporters of the unified Ukraine, and the separatists demanded that she close her business and stop promoting Western values, and they were harassing her and questioning her, and neighbors told her the separatists were watching her home. And when she discovered this, she and her husband went into hiding and then fled for the U.S. So what's involved in this case? Well, you clearly have religious persecution, you have political opinion, you have the fact that she has lost her livelihood, which is a type of social group or political opinion. So you have many different areas which a good lawyer will explore all of them and not just leave it up to one type. The different types of asylum applications that we have here are at the asylum office, affirmative, with the immigration court, defensive. One is done by the EOIR, which is the immigration court. So affirmative asylum applications, not everybody can file those. Depends, first of all, that you have to not be in removal proceedings. So if you're in removal proceedings, you cannot file an affirmative asylum application. You have to file with the court. And you file those at the asylum office, and you have to file them within 1 year of coming into the country. Now, how do you file that? You file it by mail. I would suggest you always keep a copy of exactly what you file. I can't tell you how many clients I've had who said, I filed it, but the immigration lost it, and I don't have a copy, and I can't prove I filed it, and they sent me something saying it wasn't correct and to correct it, and time goes by and the 1 year passes. So what happens? You can be granted. If you're granted at the asylum office, your wait is over. Used to be 3 months and you got an interview. Now, not the case. Now you can wait for 3.5 years. And they're processing, I think, January 2014 at this time. So it can take a very long time. Defensive asylum cases, those you must file at a master calendar or at the window. They have to be filed at the immigration court. Recently, those cases you can also lodge because of so many people who came across the borders and they were subject to detentions and they were missing the 1 year. So what do you want to file with an asylum application? Certainly not just an asylum application, and if that's what your lawyer is doing, I would have serious concerns. You need to file a lot of country documents that support your case. You need to file a lot of personal documents that support your case. You need to file a witness list. You need to file witness affidavits. And you can either be granted or denied. What happens? If you're denied, you go to the appeal board, Board of Immigration Appeals, and you appeal your case there. How do you get into removal proceedings? Well, most people don't really necessarily know what's the difference between deportation and removal proceedings. One's an old terminology, one's a new terminology. It's determined by the charging document that was issued. So removal proceedings, you can get in there because you came across the border and you were questioned and they determined you had a credible fear. Or you can get in there because of reasonable fear. Or you can get in there because you were referred by the asylum office to the court. Or you could have come in on parole. So there's different ways that you might get into removal proceedings. What documents do you need? You need to see the credible fear. It's questions and answers. You need to see what the asylum office had. You need to see the parole documents. You want to see all of these documents. So here we have another hypothetical that I'd like to give you. And this is a client from Iran. His name, we will say, is Ali. Of course, this is not his real name. After high school, he went to college in Hungary, and he lived in Hungary for about 7 years. And during the winter and summer breaks, he'd go back to Tehran. Well, he was raised a Muslim, but in Hungary, his friend influenced him to convert to Christianity. So when he went back to Tehran, he had problems. And he had problems with the regime. He was questioned. They questioned him about having these Christian Bible groups, and he was arrested by the secret police of Iran, and he was interrogated and beaten for a few hours. Well, he was released on condition that he didn't engage in this Christian activity anymore and would report. Well, after his release, he escaped and he left the country. So there's a lot of things that you can do with this case, a whole lot of things you can do. Religious persecution, you can do political opinion, you can do imputed political opinion, you can see if there are other issues relating to his wife, and there were. So there's lots of different areas a good lawyer will explore, which he has experience. And again, experience is very key for asylum cases because asylum is complicated. Know your country conditions, ask questions, listen, issue spot. So here are some of the issues that I think are relevant that you may want to talk with your lawyer about. For example, if you filed after 1 year, was there a reason? Were you medically ill? Did you have other problems? Were you not able to because of something else that happened? Did the situation change? Did you relocate? What are the strengths and weaknesses of your case? What are the other groups which you were affiliated? Sometimes groups that you associate with might be terrorist groups, and that would be a problem. Or they might be women's groups that are politically active. Or your family may be tied to other groups. So these are many things that a lawyer will ask you and will discuss with you. What are frequent problems that I see in these kind of cases? Well, frequent problems concern 1 year bars, relocation within the country. So there could be that one part of the country, and this specifically would apply to Ukraine, has very serious problems, but other parts of the country maybe don't. Could be that the country had very serious problems, and now the party which you belong to is in control of that party. So that makes your case not a good asylum case anymore. It could be that you were never harmed, that you were just threatened, but it didn't rise to the level of persecution. It could be that you lived in another country and you were a student for years, Germany or some other country. So all these things are things you want to look at. Did you have enough documentation? Do you have enough detail in your affidavits? Often judges will say, well, how did that person know that? So that's important. Do you have a client who maybe doesn't want to tell you things because they're afraid, or because they feel that it's very personal, or because they don't even know how to talk about it because they're traumatized, or because they don't remember? These are all things to look at. The Pre-Real ID Act is something that's very important now, because any case after 2005 in May will be examined and is looked at based on the Real ID Act. Does the person have a criminal record? Do they have family ties? Do they have people here who were granted asylum recently, a long time ago? All those things are things to look at. What's next if the relief is granted? Well, you get a work permit. You get a travel document, and after 1 year, you can apply for a green card. And after 5 more years, you can apply for citizenship. Now, don't go to citizenship by yourself. Don't file by yourself, because I see a lot of clients who file for asylum and then they go for citizenship and they have huge problems because their documentation is not consistent with what they said. And remember, at naturalization, immigration is looking at your entire file, not just citizenship. They're looking at your asylum, they're looking at your marriage, they're looking at everything. So that is very important to remember. What happens if you're denied? You go to the Board of Appeals. After that, maybe even possibly a circuit court. In our area, it's the 4th Circuit. Possibly you might be eligible for a motion to reopen based on family hardship areas. I'd like to talk about one other fact example. Well, this person, Mr. Nsimba, he was raised in Cameroon. He had many problems because he had very strange behavior. He'd run away, he'd have outbursts, he had seizures sometimes. His family would take him to the doctor, but basically became an outcast among his family and among his peers. His family had been arrested several times, and when he was only about 18 years old, his parents left, and they took his younger siblings, and they all became asylees, but he disappeared and sort of led a homeless life for many years. Wasn't involved with his family until he got in trouble because of his mental behavior and got in trouble with a person at work and exhibited some violent behavior. So his family tried to get him treatment, but he was not cooperative, and eventually they found him in California and he'd been arrested for loitering. So he was put into removal proceedings, and we did win asylum for him, and that was a very interesting case. A lot of it was based on his mental disabilities, which you normally would not think of as a basis for asylum. So there are many different ways to tackle and get to the same goal. So the most important thing is to talk to the client and get as much information as possible and find out the details. Sometimes with people who have mental issues or trauma, it's very difficult because they don't remember things the way they were. They also don't give you the details you need or the dates. So there's many psychological groups that you can get them tested, or neurologists, or other things that you can use to have people tested to determine, what is their capacity. Because under a particular case that came out, MAM, mental capacity is a very important factor. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those. Thank you very much for listening to this, and I'm sure I've raised a number of questions that you will have. We are available to answer questions and to help you with your cases if you need help. Thank you very much.